someone physically stepped and blocked me from going into the door. And it was the security guard. So the security guard stops me and says, "Hi, how can I help you today?" And I'm like, "Well, let me tell you how you can help me today."
You can let me into this room that I belong in, actually.
Yeah, and I said,
Right.
"I'm Rechie Valdez, Member of Parliament." And the security says to me, "Well, can I see some ID?" And I'm like,
I'm fed up and sick of you. Don't lead me on again. Don't act no more. I feel nothing for you. Just leave me alone.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacey Lee Kong, and this is Friday Talks. Take it to the group chat, a video series where I assemble a panel or an in real life group chat to discuss an aspect of the immigrant experience. And today I'm here with Anar Ali, an author, screenwriter, and the creator of the police procedural Allegiance, and Rechie Valdez, Member of Parliament for Mississauga-Streetsville and Minister of Small Business. Thank you both so much for being here.
"Thank you for having
Great
us."
to be here.
Okay, so I'm going to jump into questions because I have so many questions. When you think about your homeland, where are you thinking of? Because I think both of you have an answer that maybe people who are just seeing you might not expect.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. So when I think about my homeland, it's actually comprised of many different places.
Yeah.
So my parents immigrated from the Philippines to a little city called Kitwe, Zambia, Africa, where my brother and I were born. So what I picture in my homeland is not just where my parents are from when I go there on vacation, but where I grew up, which is very, very lush and beautiful in Zambia. And then we lived there for 9 years, my brother and my parents. And then they took that big leap of faith again to then immigrate here to Canada in 1989. And so we landed in Mississauga, and that's the city where I grew up. But what's interesting is, like, if you think about homeland, hot temperatures in Africa, came and landed in December in the middle of winter.
Oh, man.
For the first time wearing a jacket, first time wearing my boots, and just the experience of being surrounded by that beautiful snow. So when I think about homeland, I'm also picturing the textures of where I lived and where I grew up.
Okay, so I was born in Trinidad. I also moved here in December 1989. I did not have the same experience of thinking the snow was beautiful, I would say.
It was cold.
I was surprised in a bad way, but it's just wild. Like, we literally arrived the same month.
Yeah, December 19th for me.
Okay, I don't remember what day. I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna ask my mom. I'm gonna tell you later.
Okay.
Anar, what about you?
Loved hearing that. And similar background in a way because, but maybe that nomadic kind of immigration in my family even goes back generations. Because it was my grandfather on my dad's side who moved from Gujarat, India, to Zanzibar. So it was like, we often think about the immigrant experience out here of the Europeans who got on the boats and landed in America. Well, in many ways, my grandfather was like a poor kid who jumped on a boat at 13, got to Africa, to Zanzibar. And then my dad was born there. My mom's family had already been in Zanzibar for longer.
Okay.
So if you met my mom, she doesn't look Indian. She looks almost Portuguese or Italian, probably because there's a lot of mixing on an island, of course, as we know. But then within Africa, my parents moved a lot, including when we were little, for businesses. So it was between Tanzania and Kenya. And then, of course, it was the political insecurity of East Africa that kind of made us think about somewhere new. So for me, when I think of homeland, it's a pastiche of things. And it's become a place where, for me now, it's about cities.
Interesting, okay.
And I say that not because I don't like the country, I don't mean it like that. I just find myself located more in a city. And for instance, Toronto, it's been a long time to get to this point for lots of reasons. It's definitely a mix, but with cities being the core of what I think of when I think of home.
Yeah. Richie, do you have a place where you feel like you 100% belong?
Canada, period.
That's it.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, I just love it. Like, as much as I've lived in Zambia for 9 years, still, this is home.
This is home.
Yeah, and I travel in my role all across the country.
Right.
But there's nothing that feels better than, like, getting back to, like, Toronto, GTA area, and, like, having the familiarity of all your memories around you.
It's so interesting because I actually don't think there's a place where I feel like I 100% belong.
Interesting.
Like I think when I'm in Trinidad, I notice the ways that I don't have the like facility of getting around, or like it's not as easy to do those things. And or like there's cultural things that I'm not going to grasp because I haven't lived there since I was 4. And then when I'm here, I think the way that I'm perceived makes me also not always feel like I 100% belong. Like being a ethnically ambiguous mixed person is part of that as well. So, and I'm just always interested in finding out how other people feel.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? The only thing I'll add is the feeling I get of home is whenever I go to like my mom's house.
Yeah.
So my mom, I don't know about your mom, but your parents, but like they always cook like my home, like home recipes.
Yeah.
And that to me is always comfort. So for me, coming home to my home or my parents' house, like that's also for me what brings me comfort every single time.
Yeah.
And I remember being pregnant with my 2 kids. What always brought me comfort was just like the joy of the food that connected me back to like my childhood memories.
Yes.
So I know it's not physical space, but the feeling I get connecting back to eating something that makes me feel so comforted is also something that makes me feel grounded.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. Okay, how or does the sense of belonging and unbelonging show up in your life? Like, can you trace that feeling of like where you feel most rooted and when you feel most rooted there into the work that you're doing or the themes that you want to explore, like the way that you relate to people?
I'll kind of dig a little bit deeper if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Please A to Z story every time.
I'm not gonna lie, I had a very challenging childhood trying to figure out who I was because I was born somewhere. So I fully identified as a Zambian for my entire life, came to Canada, then I became Canadian. The part that I struggled with the most was my Filipino-ness. That was the part where I couldn't place it. I didn't know what to do with it for a while. So a little bit of background, I did corporate banking for 15 years. And then how I kind of ended up where I am now is I actually discovered my creative passion baking my daughter Cassidy's first birthday cake.
Yeah.
So that was like the catalyst for me to discover that there was more inside of me, that I didn't have to do the 9 to 5, much like yourself in your story. I had to break out of that somehow. And that entrepreneurial adventure allowed me to do that. My first business was your typical cupcakes, cakes, dessert tables. It was my second business where I took the Filipino flavors I grew up with, and I created fusion desserts. This is where, for the first time, I got a chance to be at marketplaces and sell products, but I was telling the story of my childhood.
Yeah.
Where I got to explain where these desserts came from. I got to explain who I was and why these desserts were important for me to share with the world. And that second business really got me to go, okay, wow, like this is who I am as a Filipino woman. And that was a part of me that was just never there for so long. And then finally, it led me to connect with other community members, other community groups, other small business community leaders. And that was where I feel like magic happened more in my life. Because when you can live authentically, but also sit in it in a very positive way, and one that is, it was very healing for me to really know who I truly was. And then since that point in my life, that's when I finally felt like I was really living. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that though, because knowing a little bit about you, that's what I wanted to know. Like, how do you integrate this place that your parents are from, and also how you look and how you present and how you read to other people with this important part of your history and childhood that like isn't necessarily visible to other people, but is so foundational. And then this like third piece of where you are and finding this belonging here. Like, that's not an easy thing to integrate.
No.
And I'm glad that you are able to sort of be honest about the time and the effort it took to figure out how to balance those things. Because I feel like we're supposed to know where we belong right away.
But everyone has their own process of kind of coming to terms with that as well. Yeah.
And I'm also like I'm curious about this answer in general, but specifically how it shows up in your work and what kind of stories you want to tell.
I'll just kind of like start off by saying, before I talk about the work, is exactly just to bounce off what we've been talking about is, you know, even when you were talking about the food earlier, because my family has been in East Africa, and yes, there's the Indian food, but specifically not even Gujarat, but Kutch, which is a sub part of Gujarat, there's always this fusion. So even like sometimes being with South Asian people here, or I might use different words because the Swahili has come into the language, or the food, the way it's cooked. It might have, like my mom might have learnt or added coconut, whereas Indian people wouldn't have added coconut to this thing. So I think this long history of like fusing and taking and giving between cultures is kind of been very much part of my family and my community. So in many ways, for me, that's how I've kind of thought about it. Even though it definitely was a struggle for a long time, particularly for my parents, I think, but also for us. But we were very little. I think it's even harder when you're older.
Yes.
For all sorts of reasons. Also the pressure of trying to support your family and all of that kind of thing. But I think that there's so much to be learned and celebrated in that fusion. You know, and not just about the people coming here and learning. It's about how is it a back and forth.
Right.
So that the power isn't about almost like, oh, aren't you lucky that we brought you here? Well, sure, but also there's so much we're giving back. And I think that's when it really becomes interesting, and I think it can work. But of course, we can also see how sometimes it's really easy, for instance, what we're seeing in the States or even around the world, this desire to split people up, you know? So that's a whole other conversation. But I say all of that to say that it obviously comes into my work. You know, in a way, I feel most at home in my writing. That's my home in many ways.
Yeah.
But I also think the show Allegiance, I was really inspired by many things, but two things in particular were I really wanted to tell the story of people of color who've been here for generations. You know, because I think it's an easier story if it's about how we open the doors for people. And the
Right.
typical story is like, oh my gosh, you're struggling economically. And somehow we all feel better as Canadians to know this.
Yes.
Don't we all? And those are not bad things to feel. Like, it's great to feel good about that. And it says so much about Canada as a country and what the foundations are. Absolutely so proud of that. But I think it's really interesting that during COVID that we're still, the Asian hate comes up.
Right.
Really interesting that the Japanese were interned, even though
Right.
they were Canadian. Really interesting during 9/11, I'm Muslim.
That
Also,
there's a spike of
hate.
Islamophobia.
Yeah, and now with all the stuff going on, what's
Yeah.
gonna? So I do think so. In other words, when do I get to be Canadian? So in a way, the show kind of explores that idea because it's set with a woman who's a cop, a brown cop. But what does it mean to be a brown cop? But she's absolutely Canadian. She's so committed. She feels Canadian. Her family's been here for generations. But suddenly when something happens, it's more tenuous.
Right.
And I think that we really get to be that society when we don't have to worry about those things.
Yeah.
That I'm Canadian because, like, the questioning of it, the doubt of it. It's worrisome because we're also at a point where it's really easy to tip. So I'm going in a lot of different areas to say, for as much as I feel at home, there's always a little part of me that doesn't quite relax.
So this question, or this sort of root of this conversation, makes me think about the tension between how we perceive ourselves and how other people perceive us, because that's kind of at the root of what you're talking about too. This must be especially interesting in your cases because there is a disparity. Like when you walk down the street, and not just among white people or a particular race or whatever, but like anyone is going to make assumptions about where you are from and where you belong based on how you look. What do people assume about you before they actually start talking to you?
I have a few stories to tell.
Tell them. Tell me all of them, please.
This one, so I was elected in 2021.
Yeah.
So picture this, it was very scary becoming a member of parliament, not knowing anything, not knowing what was going on in Ottawa. So it was my first day on the Hill, and the first meeting that we had was meeting all of caucus, including the Prime Minister. So there's these two double doors. We talk about rooms, and I wanted to share, this is a story of me entering a room physically. Two huge double doors to enter a space where we were about to have our caucus meetings. I was so nervous, and you can see like news reporters everywhere, and I'm just walking up to these double doors knowing all I gotta do is go in there, sit down, easy.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was someone physically stepped and blocked me from going into the door. And it was the security guard. So the security guard stops me and says, "Hi, how can I help you today?" And I'm like, "Well, let me tell you how you can help me today."
You can let me into this room that I belong in, actually.
Yeah, and I said,
Right.
"I'm Rechie Valdez, Member of Parliament." And the security says to me, "Well, can I see some ID?" And I'm like, "Absolutely."
Of course.
So I whipped it out and I gave it to the security and I said, "Here's my ID." I sat there taking and relishing a moment where a security guard looked at my ID, confirmed who I was, looked up at my face, looked down to my ID, and confirmed I belong there. And I knew from that moment how vitally important representation is, because in the aisles of these chambers in Parliament Hill, there's not very many people that has ever looked like me.
Yeah.
In fact, they probably assumed I was staff.
Yeah.
And so that was my first day on Parliament Hill. And it was the proudest day when I finally walked in there and said, "You know what? I do belong."
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that's what it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it's like, and thank you for saying that. And it's like clearly a hard, it's not like there's a bittersweetness to that, right? Like, yes, you are affirmed that you belong, but first you had to get this like idea that you didn't.
Exactly.
There is a positive kind of like kick-ass story here about how you were able to stand up for yourself. But in order to get to that, you had to have this experience of someone assuming you did not belong.
Yeah.
And we all know what that feels like.
Yes. It's literally breaking barriers, is literally breaking physical barriers. It's
Yeah.
breaking perceptions of people of what they think when you first get looked at. And I mean, and that was my first day. Since then, for a year and 4 months, being a minister, you'd think things would have changed. Unfortunately, not. I still continue to be asked for my ID when I walk into different rooms, even when I'm with my teams.
Right.
I think the more power you have, the more it continues. So I'm not surprised. I'm sad it's happening to you. I experience it quite a lot too, but in different ways. But I think it's tricky. Like, it'd be really nice to be able to walk in and not be questioned. That's, I think, where the groundbreaking work is not just our work. The great thing, I think, the whole opportunity now is this opportunity of having more allies who really get it. Because white men in particular and white women have a lot of power. And when they say things, it really matters. Do I like that or not like it? It's irrelevant. It is also about how people need to step up.
Right.
So I think because otherwise we're doing the work, but you can only do it so much, or there is a point of like also worrying about your own burnout of doing all the work.
Yes.
And I know this from so many people who do this, and especially when you're like in a position of power, I do think you experience it more. Surprisingly, I thought it would be the opposite, but you actually
you're
experience it more.
Yeah.
So the work is now, how do we get more people rolling up their sleeves and just kind of approaching from compassion, not excluding people, but how to just bring people in to the kind of society we actually all want, especially in Canada. But we can't do the work alone,
No, 100%.
right? So
I think you are a threat to power when you have more power.
that's what it is.
There are these systems, right? And
That's
the
what
systems
it is.
function in a very
Yeah.
particular way. And if you are going to go and disrupt that, like, it's so cute to talk about being a disruptor. It's not like nice. It doesn't feel good to constantly go into a room and be like, "Hey, FYI, I belong here. I'm really good at this job, and you should listen to me, even though you would rather not listen to me ever at all." Like, what this makes me think about is the connection between our interpersonal experiences and then the systemic reasons that those happen. So when we're talking about your experience, and it's so difficult and hard, but it's an interpersonal interaction, right? So how does that sort of make you reflect on the systems in place? Because as you also said, it hasn't changed.
Yes. But policy is shaped by the individuals who are there, seated at the table, who are there to help advocate for the needs of different communities or different groups of people. And again, because I am who I am, and I have many experiences that I bring to the table. Again, as a mom of two, as a corporate banker, as a small business entrepreneur, as a proud Filipina, Zambian Canadian. Those are the different perspectives I bring, and those are the cool perspectives that we should always bring in whatever space and place that we take up, and that's what's truly important. And by the way, Canada's pretty cool because we can have both credibility in what roles we take on and diversity. And we can actually accomplish both those things together.
Well, because also the diversity is not like a counterpoint to credibility. Like, I
Exactly.
think being able to acknowledge that and just say it plainly, because so often it is perceived and presented as, oh, you're here for DEI, you're here because of wokeness, not because you are excellent. That acknowledgement, I think, is really important.
Exactly.
Anar, do you have any sort of like insights or thoughts about not just these interpersonal things that you're experiencing and seeing, but how that ladders up into systems in your sector?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think when it comes to systems and how it reflects, it's so insidious. So what I mean by that is it's hard to pull it apart. So sometimes when even you're calling something out, it's hard because especially if you're coming from different places, the amount of work it takes. But it really does show up consistently, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I didn't expect that I would have to be an advocate so strongly, and in a space that is really great. I can't tell you what a joy it is to be on the team. And there's such, there's so much love for people. We don't have a lot of conflict. All those things are true. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of work going on.
Yeah.
On this stuff, and a lot of need still for advocating, even in a space that's good.
That's good and warm and welcoming. And I think
And
maybe
still,
that's
you need to do the work.
Yeah, like I think maybe that is the thought around, if there was a way to wrap this up tightly, is like, even in these like ideal spaces that are diverse and that are welcoming and that we work so hard to make them nice, there's still a lot of work that goes into
So
maintaining that,
much.
creating that.
There's so
and
much.
just the fact that it feels nice doesn't mean that you can not do that work. So is there a sense of responsibility for both of you? Do you feel a responsibility to the places that you belong and the people that you belong to do the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so this is, I got asked this on my very first interview ever as an MP, and the answer still remains. The responsibility is massive because in Canada, there is 1 million Filipinos strong. So there's 338 seats in the House of Commons, and I am one of those seats, carrying the weight of not just my riding of Mississauga Streetsville, but now it became something I didn't even know was going to happen to me. All of a sudden, I got this label. It's totally cool. It's a great label. Except that's where like you said, the responsibility came. And being that voice of so many people who come from different places in the world, as you've said, yes, the Philippines ultimately, but they've come from different countries as well. So yes, it has been a huge responsibility, but it's one that I not only take very seriously, but it's one that I carry every day, knowing that with this responsibility, I've got to really use my time here in Parliament wisely. It's like, what am I doing to help be the voice of so many others who are vulnerable, who have different challenges? And I think having a seat not just in Parliament, but at the cabinet table is the biggest honor of a lifetime. Being able to share my own nuanced experiences as a small business owner, as a mother, as a Filipina, like all those different nuanced in my interventions and conversations really matter.
Yeah. And that is what is giving meaning to these experiences, right? Like, I think as humans, we need to be able to find meaning in things. And if all you are experiencing is or all you can pay attention to is the parts that are hard, that's not possible or sustainable. So you have to be able to hold on to how have you actually helped.
Exactly.
Anar, how do you feel about like this conversation around responsibility?
Yeah, it's such a good one, and it's two-pronged for me. On one hand, absolutely, I feel the responsibility, and yet I also want to be free of it when I'm writing and thinking about things,
Yeah.
And yet it's not like, when I say free, I don't mean, I can't escape my identity. It's who I am. So it's like gonna come out of me. But if I think about it, it's too much. So I think it's Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison, who said, you almost have to flick the editor. She said you have to flick the white editor off your shoulder. And I think you also have to flick the other kind of those kind of heavy responsibilities off to write freely, because I think what really in art trumps everything is character. But if I'm thinking of character, I'm automatically thinking of all those things.
Yeah.
Do you know? And
Yeah.
I have to say that's what I feel the most, one of the things I feel very proud about with the show is representation, but also just telling stories authentically. You know, I don't think it's a surprise that Allegiance, there's 6 nominations for the Writers Guild Award in drama, and we got 4 out of 6. You know, I don't think it's a surprise that we're like one of CBC's top shows. And I always say this, that the circumstances of the story are specific, but the story is universal.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so that's why I think talking about it from a DEI perspective we shouldn't do it, because it's really about making space for all stories. It's not about taking space away.
Right.
It's just how do we make space for everyone? Because as soon as we start talking about taking away space, which I don't think is the way to do it, people get their backs up. So it's so wonderful to hear about the work you're doing, because it's true. I think story can hopefully generate empathy and understanding, but really policy is where the power is in terms of changing things. So it's another reason we need people like you in government, you know? It's not like you're thinking only about the Filipino Canadians, you're like Canadians, so you're thinking about everyone, but you've got this perspective that not everyone does,
Exactly.
which is great. Yeah.
I'm glad that you talked a little bit about the importance of the responsibility, but also the heaviness of the responsibility.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a thing that I struggle with a little bit, where I want the work that I do to be important, and I want to make sure that I'm using this space and this platform and this privilege that I have wisely and for the betterment of so many people. But also, I would just want to tell a good story. Like, I just want to do really excellent work, because I'm also really good at doing this, that kind of thing. And so being able to acknowledge both of those parts, I think, is also important. I do want to kind of end on this idea of why it's important to have space for the multitude of sides of this conversation. Like, we've gone in so many different directions, not because we're trying to talk about one thing, but because there are so many aspects of it. Why do you think it's important for the conversation to really be nuanced and multifaceted?
When you show up, other people who are struggling similarly can say, you know what? If she can let that go, if she can leave the comfort and be a writer or a baker or an entrepreneur or whatever, the more people will be inspired to be audacious and to live fearlessly.
And I think especially for women of color, there's lots of cultural reasons where we particularly are not encouraged to be audacious. We are not encouraged to disappoint people. And I think often we internalize that and then make sure that we also don't think it's appropriate or comfortable to do that. And so for anybody, but particularly I think for this kind of group of people, seeing that is so powerful.
Yeah.
Even when it's really hard. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to talk about?
We talked about breaking generational
Yeah.
boundaries, barriers. So I was driving in the car with my husband and my kids, and my husband says to me, hey, Rechie, you got to hear what Cassidy told me the other day. So I'm like, okay. So I'm like, Cassidy, what did you tell your dad? And she goes, Mom, I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. So I'm like, whoa.
Okay.
So she said, there's 3 things that I'm considering. The first one was to be a Kung Fu ninja. Of course, naturally.
Absolutely.
Second,
I vote for that one already.
the second is a ballet teacher.
Okay.
And the third one is a member of parliament.
Wow.
She actually means the third one. She just slid it in there.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
It felt amazing.
Yeah.
But just the fact that my daughter, who at that time she was about 8 or 9, the fact that she was just even contemplating it. I would never in a million years put myself in any leadership position at that age.
No.
And so I
You
think
could not see yourself there, but
Exactly.
she can.
Yes.
And MP is kind of part ninja and part ballet
Right, so
dancer.
actually it all
So
comes together.
I actually kind of think she's gonna do all of it.
I love
yeah,
that.
So there you go.
Cassidy, we figured out your career plan. I hope you're ready.
Yeah.
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 That's amazing. Okay, Thank you so much for this conversation. Where can people find you if they want to know more about you, if they want to connect? Are you on social? Where can the people find you?
I'm on socials, not as much as people tell me I should be.
I think that's best for you.
But you know, it's kind of a balance. But I have a handle. If you look me up on Instagram, that's usually where I'm most active. And yeah, that's the easiest way.
But what is the handle?
My handle, thank you. Thanks for the prompt. It's my first and last name, but with the WH in between, so it's Anar Ali.
Okay.
You know, like there's Chaiwala and
Yes.
stuff like that, so it's a play on that. So it's
Cute.
Anar Ali.
Cute.
Yeah.
And Richie, what about you?
And I'm on every single social media
I
platform.
bet you
Love it.
are.
I knew it. I knew
Known
it.
to man minus TikTok. Rechie.Valdez, and it's Richie with an E.
Yes. Okay, perfect. And thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would like to follow Friday Things, we're at _Friday Things on Instagram, and you can sign up for the newsletter at fridaythings.com/subscribe.
Can't you take a hint?